Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and for today's Easter card I am using the My Favorite Things Birdie Brown Bubble Over with Joy stamp set. And I have the coordinating Die-Namics dies here, and I have them face down on the cardstock I'm going to stamp on. I've shown this many times in videos, and with the My Favorite Things Die-Namics, I rarely cut them apart. Just it's a convenience thing, plus they don't nest any other dies inside of them, so I can do things like this. So by having them face down, I can line up all the stamps with the coordinating dies. Then I close the lid of my mini MISTI here, and now all my stamps are lined up and I can stamp them. Normally I would stamp pretty much the entire set, but I only wanted the bunnies this time because I'm going to do something else for the bubbles. And I'm inking up the stamps with My Favorite Things Extreme Black ink. I'm going to color these in with Copics, so I'm using Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock here. And after everything is stamped, I'm going to start coloring them in with Copic Markers. Keeping the coloring really simple, I decided just to keep all these bunnies basically white. So just adding a tiny little bit of shading to them. Although they'd look really cute if you did them like in different colors and gave them little, some could be polka dot, like, real bunnies have all sorts of colors and, patterns on them and everything else. But again, I wanted to say simple because I knew I was going to go a little bit overboard with the rest of the card. So I used kind of a purple for a bit of shading, and then I blended that out with the C00 marker. And then I used R32 and R20 to fill in the little inner ear portions, and I used that R20 to add a little bit of pink for a little bit of, blush to their cheeks. So after I had done that, I wanted to blend it out a bit. So I blended it out with both the C00 as well as my colorless blender, just because I didn't want too much gray on these images. I wanted to keep them mostly white, little white Easter bunnies. So blended all that out with the C00 and then went back in with my colorless blender just to kind of push it all out just that little bit more. And then for all of their little outfits, I went with pastel colors, keeping it pretty simple again, using only like a couple colors each, and then again my colorless blender just to kind of lighten everything. But I'm matching the colors to MFT's pastel pattern paper packs. So I just chose colors that were very similar to the colors in their pattern papers. And I just went along and filled in their little outfits, starting with the darkest, adding the lightest shade, and then I would take my colorless blender and just kind of press the color out a little bit more, just keep things really light and cute. And then after I had finished coloring in all of their little outfits, I used the same blue-green colors just to color in that little bottle of bubbles and their little bubble wands. And I didn't realize here I was like totally starting to go off screen as I'm like getting absorbed into the whole coloring process. So I used these blue greens to do the little container of the bubbles and the bubble wands, and then I just used that C00 marker for the two little bunnies where they have buttons on their outfits, just to keep everything super simple. So once I have everything colored, I'm going to use that coordinating die set and tape it into place with some washi tape, and then I can run this through my machine and die cut them all in one pass, just like so. So after I've got everything die cut, I don't know who to give credit for this, but I've seen several cards online using the balloon shaker window and frame, the inner die. It's egg-shaped. I wouldn't even have thought of this. I don't think that much outside the box. So I was fascinated by that. So whoever first originally came up with it, brilliant. So I used that as well as one of the balloon pouches because it's egg-shaped. And then the smaller egg dies are from the SOMEBUNNY Suite stamp set and the coordinating die set that I did a previous video on earlier in my little series. So I used those 3 dies to die cut several of these different pastel pattern papers from multiple MFT packs. So I'm just using my sidekick for this because I'm doing so many passes and just die cutting a ton. I had no idea how many I was going to need. I just grabbed a ton of patterns and colors kind of at random, just so I would have a nice variety. In the end, it actually ended up being perfect without me having to waste any of them, because I could use a few on the inside. I was able to, you know, bundle up a bunch on the outside of the card, but I just kept running them through until I was kind of happy with the little pile I'd amassed of all of these patterned little eggs here. So once I've got all of those die cut, I also die cut some green cardstock with the Grassy Hills Die-Namics from MFT, and I die cut 3 pieces for that because I want to create a little, like, you know, grassy knoll where I'm going to tuck in all my little eggs and bunnies into. And then my background is some white cardstock that I die cut with the largest of the MFT A2 rectangle set to set. So after I had done all of that die cutting, I used the Mini Cloud Edges stencil and my tumbled glass distress ink, and I'm just barely touching my blending tool to that tumbled glass distress ink and barely pulling the color, like just stopping shy of pulling it off of the stencil so that I have that nice, like, very thin edge to it, so I can create this fun cloudy background and not add too much ink to it. So I just kept, you know, rotating the stencil and shifting it upwards until I filled in this entire piece of white cardstock with my fun little cloudy edges. And then I needed to figure out how I was going to add this egg window shaker element. So I figured if I added the 2 larger pieces of my grassy edges to the background, the bottom piece I was going to have popped out to kind of cover the bottom. And so if I held the back ones in place and then ran it through my die cut machine, my Gemini machine, with this die in place, it will give me an idea. I didn't expect it to cut through all 3 layers of cardstock. Sometimes this machine will cut through quite a bit, but this is 3 layers of heavyweight cardstock. So it cut through almost completely. So it cut through all the grass for me. And then I just put the die right back where it was after I had removed the scraps of green cardstock here, and then I just left the die in place and ran it through a second time so that it would die cut that window for me into my card base here, or card front. So once I've got my little window cut, I can adhere the pouch into place. But before I do any adhering, I decided I wanted to get my sentiment stamped onto this background before I end up with all the dimension and everything else glued in place. So I'm going to put this back in my mini MISTI, and the sentiment is from the older Birdie Brown. This is the SOMEBUNNY set. I just really like the sentiments in this set, so I wanted to use that on the outside of the card. So I'm going to line those up with my mini MISTI, and I always like to look, especially if I'm adhering more than one stamp for a sentiment, I like to use the, you know, the grid lines on the lid to make sure I've got everything straight. And then I'm going to ink this up and stamp this with that same extreme black ink, and I'm just going to keep stamping it multiple times so it gets really black and crisp and perfect. And once I have my sentiment in place, now I can start assembling this card front. So to adhere the pouch, the shaker pouch into place, I just flip this over and I'm just doing a really thin line of multi-medium matte adhesive, trying to make sure there's not too much because you don't want it oozing out around the edges or anything like that. And then I can adhere my little pouch. And then for the actual shaker elements, I have some Studio Caudia Sparkling Hearts Chunky Glitter. And first I grabbed it with my fingers and then realized that was a bad idea because, you know, they kind of like to cling to fingers very, very easily. So I grabbed my little Tonic craft spoon. This thing is fabulous. So scooped in a fair bit into my little pouch of that. And then I also added some Pretty Pink Posh Sparkling Clear Seed Beads, because the beads are what give it the shaker sound, especially in these pouches, whereas just the chunky glitter, you don't really hear anything. So I like adding seed beads when I can. It just gives it that extra. And because these shaker pouches can hold a decent amount, I like adding things like that to it without having to worry about them getting anywhere. Because I ran a line of that multimedia matte around the perimeter of the shaker pouch, as well as the perimeter of this pattern paper I used to back it. Made sure to press it really well, and now it's all completely sealed in. So it's not going anywhere. So once I have that all done, I can now start assembling all my little elements to create my scene. So I'm going to start adhering this green cardstock that I die cut into the grass. And I decided my bottom layer would be flat to the card base. And then the second layer I would pop up with one piece of foam tape. So it just gives it that extra dimension. And because I die cut everything in the beginning there, it just all kind of nestles in like a puzzle piece, making it so much easier to do. So with the pieces on the right hand side of this, I just adhere them into place, and then I just flip over the card front and trim off those pieces that were hanging over the edge. And then I'm going to add my second piece with a layer of foam tape. And then the final bottom piece, I'm going to add with 2 layers of foam tape, because that's basically the depth of these shaker pouches. If you're familiar with the 3M Scotch foam tape, it's the depth of 2 layers of foam tape. That's kind of how I measure things. That's how my world works. It's like, oh, it's the, you know, width of a piece of foam tape. It's the depth of, you know, 1 or 2 layers of foam tape. Anyway, so for this remaining bottom layer, I added 2 layers of the foam tape into place so I could pop that up. So it looks like that little shaker egg is kind of, you know, nestled in the grass here. And then I'm going to start adhering all of these little pattern paper eggs. So some of them I trimmed down, especially these bigger ones, so that I could, you know, kind of tuck them in amongst the grass, and they're not just going to cover everything up because they're quite big. So I just kept kind of trimming some of these bigger ones down, and then the smaller ones I would just kind of nestle in here and there, adhering everything into place with my multimedia matte adhesive, because I had it out, it was sitting in front of me. There's, you know, sometimes I'll make cards and I'll use like 6 different types of adhesive just because I like being extra like that. But a lot of times, like, one thing is good. So after I got all of the large eggs and started deciding like which ones I was going to set aside and use on the inside of the card, I'm going to adhere all of my, you know, smaller eggs here and there, just kind of tucking them in amongst all of this grass. And honestly, you could almost leave the card like this, like you wouldn't need to add, you know, the bunnies, but the bunnies are like absolutely adorable, and I just had to add them. But I just thought how cute it was having this, you know, little scene with all these little eggs. So you could totally do a card just themed like that if you wanted. So I still had to add my bunnies though, because they're so adorable. So I kind of figured out where I wanted to place all the little bunnies on my card here. And same thing. Some of them I just adhered flat like as is. And then a couple of them I kind of had to pop up with foam tape. And then the one I wanted to have standing on top of the shaker egg, I'm going to add, again, 2 layers of foam tape there so that he's kind of flush with the top of that little shaker egg. And then that little yellow bunny, it was just funny that when I tilted the card front and he kind of fell in amongst the grass, I really liked how that looked. I thought that was really cute. He was kind of, you know, peeking out there. So that just settled it for me where I was going to adhere him. So I just tucked him right back in there and pressed him into place. So once I've got my card front mostly finished, I want to finish the inside of my card. So I have my heavyweight white card base, and it's a standard A2 size card, so 4 1/4 by 5.5. And I kind of figure out where I'm going to place my little eggs and my remaining bunny, and then I've got a sentiment from that same Bubble Over with Joy stamp set. So I got that lined up, and I'm going to ink that up and stamp that with that extreme black ink on the inside of the card. And then I'm going to adhere the little eggs into place and just trim off the bit that's hanging off of the bottom of the card here. And then to finish off, because it looks like the bunny's doing something, I don't want him just, you know, sitting there on top of the egg. I took the solid bubble images from the set, which I just love, and I stamped them with MFT's Snow Cone dye ink, and I just, with the little highlight on them, they're just perfect. So I stamped these several times onto the inside of this card, so they're kind of, you know, floating away. And then I'm just going to adhere my card front. And then for the, you know, pièce de résistance, I probably just butchered saying that, but anyway, you know what I mean. I use the Studio Caudia, the new iridescent bubbles that I've been obsessed with. I've shown them in videos. I've been splashing them all over social media. I'm obsessed with these. I've been wanting to make this card since I got these, and I finally, you know, got the time to sit down and do it. But this is why I didn't use the stamped bubbles. I wanted to use these so bad because how perfect are they? So I had them all over this card. I put them everywhere. I would have put more if I could. I just, you know, splashed them all over the card and then adhered them into place with that multi-medium matte adhesive. And then once all of them are adhered, that finished off my card. And now I have this fun little shaker element, and you can hear the little seed beads in the shaker pouch because, like I said, that's what makes it. So as always, I will have links to everything that I used in the description box below the video, as well as on my blog, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!